good morning. We'll call the Special Ordinance Committee meeting of September 27th to order. And can we start with a roll call?
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
Chair Snedden.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just to highlight, we do have two items. Item 1 is on proposed amendments for the municipal code pertaining to definitions, vessels, slip assignments, and parking in the Santa Barbara Harbor. We'll hear that item first. And then item 2 is the ordinance to assign additional civilian police oversight duties to the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners. Do we have any public comment for items not on the agenda?
We have one person online that has not raised their hand. If you'd like to speak on items not on the agenda, please raise your hand. No.
Okay, thank you. Well, with that, we'll invite presentation on the harbor amendments.
Good morning, council members, Chair Snedden. My name is Eric Engebretson. I'm the Harbor Operations Manager for the Waterfront Department, and today we have a few proposed municipal code amendments for Title 17. The Waterfront Department periodically reviews Title 17 Harbor and to maintain the proper legal framework for the Waterfront Department. It helps us with our policies and programs. And this year's several definitions were added or edited, plus 5 amendments are proposed. They are 17-12-050, vessels berthed, moored, or anchored in the Harbor District, 17-20-005, slip assignment policy, and 17-36-040, 72-hour parking limits in the harbor parking lot. Our first up is our definitions. Pretty basic, 17-04-010, and this clarifies or adds definitions to vessel lengths and or beams of vessels. In the past, with lengths, there have been some discrepancies from the manufacturer versus what the boat actually measures out to be, and those were significant. So we removed any question there to the overall length of a vessel, which pretty much is just tip to tip of the vessel. Same goes for the beam of the vessel language. It defines the widest area of the vessel as opposed to the vessel's manufactured width. And again, we had a lot of significant differences between the manufacturers and the numbers we were getting. And this will help remove any of the ambiguity with the width as well. Discussion 2, let's see. Vessels berthed, moored, or anchored in the Harbor District. This revision clarifies existing law that all vessels must be operational with exception of the 4 floating objects. Some folks call them the 4 floating houseboats in the harbor. With this revision, it'll maintain the department's compliance with the local coastal plan, and Santa Barbara Harbor will remain a recreational and commercial boating facility. 17-20-005B2A, slip assignment policy, proof of ownership required. This clarifies the form of vessel ownership provided to the Waterfront Department via state registration or federal documentation upon the slip transfer. Failure to provide registration or federal documentation to the Waterfront Department upon slip transfer would be cause for slip termination. Municipal Code 17-20-005B2B, permitted types of ownerships. This clarifies whatever corporate ownership structure holds ownership of a vessel. Documents must be submitted to the Waterfront Department to establish that all slip permittees' names within the corporate ownership have the legal authority to bind the corporation and sign the slip permit. This clarifies all types of ownership entities may hold title. And 1736-040B1, 72-hour parking limit in the harbor parking lot. The proposed amendment clarifies that slip permittees with a valid slip permittee parking permit are allowed to park no more than 30 days, after which time the vehicle has to leave the parking lot for 96 hours. Failure to do so renders the permit invalid, and it pretty much allows Harbor Patrol to enforce vehicle storage issues that we've had in the past in that parking lot. And those laws would be consistent with California Vehicle Code. These proposed amendments will codify existing administrative policies and practices and provide clarity to the boaters, liveaboards, and slip permittees. And our timeline, we went through Harbor Commission on May 19th, 2022. Here before you today, on the 27th, 2022. We would go to City Council for introduction tentatively on October 18th, 2022, and City Council for adoption on the 25th, 2022. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And if I can't, our Assistant City Attorney will be glad to help out as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. Do we have questions? Yes, Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm just going to walk through those. Item 1 on the beam and the length. Are there any any known immediate impacts to existing slip holders, and then what are you going to do about it?
Let me get back to that. Chair Stedman, or Chair Snedden, Councilmember Jordan. There won't be any significant changes. This is just going to give us the ground rules moving forward with folks that are questioning those measurements. So what's here right now is great. We certainly don't want boats banging into each other that are too wide, and want to make sure that we have groundwork to keep that in line.
Okay, thanks. Then on the second item, I know you worked through definitions and then mooring stuff and the thing, and then an attachment on moorings, and I just thought I'd let you have the opportunity to do moorings for dummies and tell me about it. So in particular, East Beach, I know I could call it one thing, but I know you actually have a number down there for that designation. What are we doing, or what do we do, or is there stuff we could better do at the time we're making these changes to make sure we don't lose boats onto the beach? Anecdotally, I'm told that everybody has to have a minimum type of mooring system, but astute people who are actively using their boats, putting them there, using them, typically have a mooring system well in excess of the minimum requirements. And is that how we're getting in trouble with boats washing ashore on minimum requirements? And how do we remedy that? And is this the time?
A good question, Chair Snedden, Councilmember Jordan. We currently do have a permitted mooring field in the harbor, and that attachment was added. Mooring versus anchoring a vessel are quite different. We do have regulations in place for moorings. None of the moorings that the city has implemented, none of those moorings have failed. Now, if you were to bring your boat up and just drop an anchor, which many folks have been doing lately, that's quite a bit different than what we have with our mooring program. Our mooring program is thousands of pounds of mooring versus a 10-pound anchor, if you will.
And that equipment's ours, right? We put it out there and then we charge a fee for that?
No, we charge a fee for the space. The slip or mooring holder purchases that mooring gear
Okay. And
as a
so-
requirement.
But those designated places have to have that 1,000-pound apparatus.
Up to, correct.
Okay. And then we just simply allow people outside of that scope to come up and put anchors down, right?
We do have anchoring areas that are seasonal that do move around within the harbor waters, correct?
And so those are the only ones that typically fail?
Correct.
So has there been any discussion on remedies to that by increasing our archaic wayfarer philosophy that we always just have to have a place to put an anchor down?
No, that's a great question. We have addressed that through conversations with Harbor Commission, including insurance requirements. However, we do know that some vessels it's difficult to get insurance for. And up to and eliminating that area as an anchored point, so boats could not anchor there. We do have some concerns that it'll just displace the problem and move it farther to the north or south. And then all we've really done is moved a problem instead of really addressed it. So we are in discussions. Insurance seems to be a good one. And
And historically, too, we've had the issue, too, when they're clearly moored or anchored in city waters, but wash up a little south on county waters, and then we all start pointing fingers at each other on whose problem it is, right?
that has come up, yes. And we do currently, we do have funds in place through the state. The SAVE program, Surrendered and Abandoned Vessel Exchange, where we can step in. We do have a funds assist with the Sheriff's Department. If they run out of funds, that we have funds available for cleanup as well.
Okay, and doesn't part of the, that run over to operational, that clearing up the definition or the enforcement of operational boats or vessels also takes care of some of the incidents where what's out there on an anchor is not an operational vessel, and even if it started dragging, that vessel clearly has no way to save itself? I mean, I think there's one person in particular, we know who we're talking about, right? That buys a boat for $1 and then just puts it out there on an anchor, right?
Chair Snedden, Councilmember Jordan, yes, that has gone on for quite some time. The operational, that requirement, Harbor Patrol does go out and enforces, and when we find a vessel that appears to be derelict or non-operational, we do follow up with the owner.
Okay, and then on the last two, just same thing, on the type of ownership stuff, are there known impacts to current slip holders that will have a consequence now, or is this pretty much under control now and this just cleans up the language for the future?
You are correct, cleans up the language.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And any questions from Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez?
Thank you. On discussion point number 2, where it says the vessel must be operational, excuse me if you already answered this, but like what does that mean exactly?
Chair Snedden, Councilmember Gutierrez, the vessel has to be able to operate under its own power, whether it's mechanical or sail. If it cannot operate under those circumstances, then it's deemed non-operational, and it has to be removed from the waters within 15 days.
So, under its own power, I'm just kind of, I'm trying to find any excuse somebody could give to battle that. So, we're talking about an inanimate object, and the definition is under its own power. So does that mean that, like, for example, if it's a boat and the owner comes out with oars and they start to row, does that mean that that qualifies as under its own power, or?
In short answer, no. No, if it's a mechanical craft, you have to be able to turn a key, the engine has to turn on, and you have to be able to drive it just like you would a car. If it's a vessel that's rigged for sail, you would have to be able to hoist the sails and sail it to a safe place.
So if they rig it up so that they could be on a bike and they pedal the bike and somehow that turns a turbine, that wouldn't qualify either?
That's a bit of a stretch. If they can safely navigate, it would be something looked at on a case-by-case basis, but not likely.
Okay. Okay.
And if I may, Chair Stone and Councilmember Gutierrez, like our definition of vessel was crafted with a U.S. Supreme Court case in mind, being that it was key that a boat, vessel in this case, is used as a means of transportation for goods or people. So you're not having people just placing objects that are not designed for that purpose into the harbor. So we followed the U.S. Supreme Court decision, cleaned that up, and for future situations, we're not going to have people just place inanimate objects and call it a vessel. And that's what this change allows us to do moving forward.
Okay. And then on discussion point 5, the 96 hours that they had to exit the parking lot, why is it that number? So that's what, 4 days?
Chair Sneddon, Councilmember Gutierrez, I'm going to defer to our city attorney on the 96-hour.
Sure. Chair Sneddon and Councilmember Gutierrez, that's generally kind of consistent with all our parking lots in terms of at least having after a 30-day period, people must leave for 96 hours. So it's not, our parking lot does not become a residence, right? We do have in the city safe parking program, but the goal of that is to at least kind of maintain that it's not being continuously used for that purpose.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. And then I have just 2 follow-up questions. One is, do we have to exempt the 4 floating objects? We get a lot of questions about those, and maybe if you could explain a little bit more about why they are exempted, or if we have to exempt them.
Chair Sneddon, Commissioner, or council members, those 4 floating homes existed prior to municipal code regulating that. So to possibly look at a grandfather clause that had been discussed. However, at this time, we haven't moved forward with that, and we're still in discussion with the city attorney's office about that. We certainly had to get something in place so that we didn't have any of the issues similar that have plagued Sausalito with some of their homes and the wars going on up in Northern California over this issue.
Chair Sneddon, too, if I may add, the main reason, too, is money. We would be stopped at least from removing it outright based on 2 reasons. One, that it existed before this ordinance change. Number 2, estoppel that prior administration Harbor approved the modifications, the uses, and with that go ahead, it'd be very costly litigation saying that we because of our tacit approval, now we're stopped from removing it without paying compensation, like a regular takings case. So that's why they're there.
Thank you. And then nothing in these ordinance amendments make it so that those 4 are guaranteed. It's just silent on those 4.
Those four are at least in the ordinance exempt from the definition of vessel. Those 4 are specifically called out in the ordinance, and they're exempt because they would not meet the definition of a vessel.
Okay.
So they're being exempt under this ordinance.
Thank you. And it's limited to those 4 as they currently are, not with additions or changes or
Correct, Chair.
replacement of one for another.
Correct, Chair Sneddon. And if they were to expand in the future, everything else, we could say no. And if they were to do so without our approval, the argument then they would lose their right to be there.
Thank you. And then I also had a follow-up question to Councilmember Jordan's line of questions about Anchorage, and maybe this isn't the right moment to, but I don't want to miss the moment to see if there's something more we can do in terms of enforcement or fees or fines or something. We had 2 just recently, and they spill quite a bit of fuel. They're costly to clean up. We have volunteers in the community who do that. It seems to be an increasing problem, so if you could,
Of course, Chair Sneddon, council members. The vessels that currently went on the beach, we had Heal the Ocean that came in on one of the vessels, and we are, through California boating law, we have to wait a certain amount of time before we can deem a vessel has been abandoned. However, if the vessel creates a hazard, any kind of public safety issue or hazard to the environment, we can step in and clean that vessel up immediately. And we do have funds from the state to reimburse us for those costs. So we can go after, and we have gone after folks that abandon property on our beaches through the harbors and navigation codes, as well as go after them for the costs of cleanup as well.
and is there a way to deem it a hazard if it's improperly anchored? If you could see that it's heading that way, do you have to wait until it breaks free, washes ashore, sits for a while, or is there an earlier part in the process?
I think the earlier process would probably be deeming whether or not it's operational. If it looks derelict, to contact the owners, and that's what we currently do. The Harbor Patrol does do that.
Okay. And then,
And Chair Sten, just to hop in, Mike Wiltshire, Waterfront Director, you're by no means missing an opportunity here. These municipal code was really just clean up. This is a big issue, boats on the beach, that we take really seriously. And so this is a big enough issue to kind of address with Harbor Commission and all the entities involved. And so we do plan to take that on over the coming kind of months and year. And so this isn't necessarily that. So
Thank you.
We're on it.
So we don't need to give direction today to address that at Harbor Commission? That's already on
No,
your...
we're going to be
okay.
pursuing that.
Thank you. Then we have some follow-up questions from Councilmember Jordan.
Just a couple more before I opine, but don't give direction. I just wanted to make sure in the open mooring area, that we also require and also make inspections to make sure those boats are operable too, right?
Chair Sneddon, Councilmember Jordan, correct.
Okay. And then what's a 1,000-pound mooring setup cost?
Anywhere from $6,000 to $9,000.
So pretty expensive. Okay.
The initial buy-in, correct.
Yeah, all right. And then the field, the area that we allow or designate right now as whatever we call 1,000-pound mooring areas, are we able to actually, given the topography or whatever you call under the ocean, are we able to expand that area if there were people that could avail themselves and afford the mooring setup?
That's a great question. We've looked at it. Right now, we are undersubscribed in that area. Right now, just trying to get folks there, and I think it's that initial buy-in that's kind of puts people back a bit. The permit, the annual permit itself is relatively inexpensive. It's certainly something we could do. We just we renewed our permit for that through the State Lands Commission and California Coastal Commission for 10 more years. And we could possibly look at an addendum to that permit with whether we expand or not.
Doesn't make me feel any better too. So if you used all those spaces up, you have to go through approvals even to expand that space though also, right? To the agencies you just mentioned. It's not just as easy as saying, hey, we got more sand under the water over here to the left and let's make that area available too. There are processes you have to go through.
Chair Sneddon, yes, and you're correct.
Okay. And then typically, I'm sure everyone's unique, could you give us some sense of a dollar cost to somebody when a boat washes up on the ocean? So let's say you're using the state available funds. What's it cost to pull a 25 or 30-foot sailboat off the beach and dismantle it and discard it and all that?
Chair Sneddon, Councilmember Jordan, a vessel being turned into the harbor through the vessel turn-in program is much cheaper than a vessel that washes up on the beach.
Right.
That said, to answer your question, the vessel on the beach typically runs about $3,000 to clean off the beach.
So that
on that size
$6,000
craft.
to $9,000 buy-in for the mooring is still more expensive than, in theory, watching your vessel roll up on the beach and having somebody else take care of it for you too, right?
That would appear
Yeah.
so.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions, comments, discussion. Yes, Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you. So nothing I see here that is bothersome, but so carry on. But will just take the opportunity, when one of those vessels rolls up on the beach, it's all of a sudden, it's like a huge thing, and what's really unfortunate about it, I think, is many times we're at the mercy of ourselves versus the Hillary and Heal the Ocean has to rally the troops to take care of it, and rather than that same amount of effort not going into stopping it happening in the first place. So, preemptive rather than reactive. And so I just would, and it's like, the restrictions that you laid out that I'm sure were not even a tenth of what they really are for California boating law, and how you have to wait and look at it and wait and look at it, and finally you can go do it. It's probably similar to property on State Street. The effort to have to go through that versus just the opportunity to shore up our controls so that it just doesn't happen and we don't get put in that position. So I would just encourage you to have that conversation with Harbor Commission and keep working on something to keep it from happening. I know it only happens 4 times a year, but 3 or 4 times a year, but it just seems like the level of response and angst to that happening 4 times a year is pretty high, and we could, other than $6,000 to $9,000 for a mooring, we could solve it pretty easily and keep it from happening. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. And is there any further discussion? Councilmember Gutierrez?
Just a follow-up question. I imagine this has been discussed with the residents of the harbor in length.
Councilmember Gutierrez, we have had a meeting covering the topic of potential for vessel insurance, and so that was a public meeting. In reality, we're sort of at the early phases of looking into beached vessels and vessel insurance for vessels in the marina and in the anchorage. So we're somewhat on the front end of it. The reality is there is some economics there. Moving towards a mooring field is very expensive. It's expensive for somebody, either us, we as the waterfront subsidize those $10,000 moorings and then give them at a discounted rate, or we pass that cost through and it becomes a cost recovery. And so there is a balance there. There are, as Councilmember Jordan mentioned, 3, 4 on a big storm year, maybe more vessels hit the beach each year. From an economics point of view, $3,000, $5,000 per, it's not an enormous hit. It does draw a lot of attention and some environmental concerns and safety concerns, but we really want to weigh what we as a department and enterprise fund are biting off by moving towards a mooring field. So there's just a lot of things to think about and address, and we're kind of just starting that with Harbor Commission and the waterfront community.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So I think you've heard our comments, and I don't think we need to give formal direction, but it's a common concern, I think, of the 3, that we continue to look at what we can to prevent those from breaking free and washing ashore. And with that, if there's no further comment, entertain a motion.
So I'll move the staff recommendation to forward the ordinance to City Council for introduction.
Second.
Thank you. And can we have a roll call vote?
Recommendations moved by Councilmember Jordan, seconded by Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez. Councilmember Jordan?
Yes.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez?
Aye.
And Chair Sneddon.
Yes, thank you.
Passes.
So that moves forward to council, and thank you so much. And we are ready for item 2, The subject ordinance to assign additional civilian police oversight duties to the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners. And we will start with staff presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Sneddon and members of the Ordinance Committee. I'm Barbara Anderson, Senior Assistant to the City Administrator, and we are here today to advance forward another important step in implementation of the new civilian oversight system of the Santa Barbara Police Department. This afternoon, the recommendation from staff is that the Ordinance Committee receive the draft ordinance amending the municipal code by adding Chapter 2.09 to assign additional civilian police oversight duties to the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners and provide feedback to staff in order to introduce the ordinance to City Council. The draft ordinance is a result of 13 months of work and community engagement by the Community Formation Commission, as well as deliberations by City Council and further research and community engagement facilitated by city staff. We are moving forward swiftly because we do not want to lose momentum from when the CFC's final report was delivered to council and when ideally a newly constituted Fire and Police Commission would step into this critical role and begin providing enhanced oversight of the police department as early as January 2023. We feel it's important to address and really emphasize at the start of our discussion this afternoon that the ordinance does not sufficiently address every component of the new civilian oversight system, nor should it. The ordinance is meant to specifically codify the new and elevated duties and authorities of police oversight of the Fire and Police Commission. There are other existing and new components of the civilian oversight system that will be documented in new policies and procedures. This includes the independent police monitor role in the city administrator's office, as well as the complaint process. There are also new legal requirements from the state of California, such as SB 2, that increase transparency and accountability regarding police misconduct that will be implemented and overseen by the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, also known as POST. We fully acknowledge how important it is to carefully document these components, how they will interact and how they will support each other, as well as how they will be assessed. Documenting these components in policies and procedures also enables us to learn, evolve, and make modifications to ensure relevancy rather than an ordinance which remains static. We want to first restate that the recommendations from the Community Formation Commission included creation of a separate oversight body that would have less restrictions than a chartered commission. However, this would have resulted in two commissions advising City Council and the City Administrator's Office regarding oversight of the police department. This could lead to many administrative and operational inefficiencies and result in conflicting recommendations, duplication of efforts, and overextension of staff. Therefore, the directive from Council on June 6th was to assign new duties and authorities for police oversight to the existing oversight body, the Fire and Police Commission. This comes with limitations per the city charter, but also considerable advantages. Membership is limited to qualified electors of the city of Santa Barbara and to 5 total members. The commission would not be able to advise on disciplinary action or be part of active investigations, nor would any council-created commission be able to do so. On the other hand, there are advantages of being a chartered commission. Because the commission is not created solely by council or solely by ordinance, it takes considerably more to abolish. It would require an amendment to the charter and vote by the people. This in turn provides much more sustainability than a commission created any other way. The draft ordinance includes historically significant new duties and authorities. Never before has the city created and supported this level of community oversight of the police department. And we aren't neglecting the mention of the fire department, given that this is the Fire and Police Commission. But we are overemphasizing the police department because that was the specific work of the Community Formation Commission, as well as the directive from council. The commission will conduct ongoing reviews of the complaint process and also facilitate more trust in and accessibility to this process. The commission will also review reports on the number and type of internal and external complaints received and subsequent action taken, including the number of officers disciplined and the level of discipline imposed. The commission will also review and discuss with the police chief in open session the contents of individual investigations if and when they become disclosable under the California Public Records Act. They will also receive presentations from the police chief concerning any officer-involved shootings once determinations or findings have been made by the agency conducting such an investigation. It should not be underestimated how engaging in these discussions in an open public forum will help facilitate collective learning, build trust, and shift understanding and perceptions. As you've seen, there is a lot of detail in the ordinance, and it has been understandably challenging to engage our community members in this level of detail. Prior to the release of the ordinance to the public, city staff met with key stakeholder groups, including former members of the Community Formation Commission, as well as the Santa Barbara Police Department leadership team and the Police Officers Association. Our internal team made significant edits to the ordinance based on the feedback received, and then released it to the broader public on August 23rd for a 30-day public comment period. So in earnest, we worked almost 2 months on the draft for you to receive the current iteration. We only received 3 written public comments through the established email address, but we also presented to and are engaged with 88 individuals over the course of 30 days to capture additional comments. The 54 total comments received were detailed in the stakeholder public comment matrix attached to the committee agenda report. This does not include the individuals that I engage with in my day-to-day work, including those that approached me in the city administrator's office, or while I'm at the neighborhood navigation centers, or those that I've spoken with directly after seeing them interact with our law enforcement officers. These type of interactions enable me to get a more authentic sense of how our criminal justice system operates, impacts our residents, and the culture of our police department. From the comments received, there were several areas of broad support. This includes the exclusion of individuals who have a sustained finding of serious misconduct. This is more detailed than any other ordinances we've researched from other municipalities, but critically important in ensuring the legitimacy and the credibility of the commission. It also includes the guidance provided in consideration of criminal history. We absolutely want to support and encourage individuals that have been impacted by the criminal justice system to serve on this commission. Additionally, there is broad support for the rigorous and comprehensive orientation and training program as detailed in the ordinance. But I do want to note that this is not exhaustive. This level of detail isn't usually included in an ordinance, as you know, but we wanted to incorporate the recommendations from the CFC as well as that of law enforcement to provide a robust framework that can be refined and adapted through policies and procedures to meet the needs of the commission. Lastly, there is broad support for the powers and duties as outlined in the ordinance, given the limitations of the charter. This is tailored to meet the current needs of the community and still allows for us to learn and evolve as needed. We also want to highlight the areas of robust debate, as it is critically important for the ordinance committee to weigh in and advise staff. The first is regarding membership qualifications and disqualifications. Given the limited number of commissioners, we leaned in to inclusivity rather than exclusivity. There have also been First Amendment challenges into discriminatory practices for excluding membership on city boards and commissions. Therefore, we do not have exclusions beyond individuals with a history of serious misconduct in the ordinance as drafted. However, this was an area of many hours of debate among the Community Formation Commission and a key question, asked of the broader community. Of 979 survey responses collected by the CFC, 42% believe that people with prior law enforcement experience should be eligible to serve on the oversight board. Of the 23% of those 979 individuals responded yes, but only after they've been out of law enforcement for a number of years, then 43% of those respondents stated 5 years. So to reiterate, 213 of the 979 community members responded to that question. So one, the first question being if former law enforcement should serve and be eligible to serve, and two, that specific time, the time frame in terms of their end of service. The CFC final report recommends excluding all law enforcement officers that have served in Santa Barbara County, and for others, that it be 7 or more years from their time of service. Additionally, the requirement of ride-alongs received significant input from former members of the CFC, as well as that of law enforcement stakeholders. It has been emphasized repeatedly by our law enforcement stakeholders that there is no equivalent immersive experience to a ride-along, and many community members support that belief. However, the CFC would like that specific language of equivalent or immersive experience to be included rather than the current language that commissioners can request accommodations. Lastly, there is and will continue to be advocacy in support of an amendment to the city charter that will enable the commission to have additional duties and authorities of police oversight, including the ability to advise on active investigations and disciplinary action in active investigations. So to reiterate, the recommendation from staff to the Ordinance Committee is to receive the draft ordinance amending the municipal code by adding Chapter 2.09 to assign additional civilian oversight duties to the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners and provide feedback to staff in order to introduce the ordinance to City Council. We look forward to hearing from you. We'd also like to welcome Chief Gordon to share a few remarks in regard to the oversight system being proposed in the draft ordinance, and then we can turn it back to the committee for any questions or clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome, Chief.
Good afternoon. It is good afternoon. All right, I had to check my watch. We're right on the cusp, right? So, good afternoon, Chairperson Sneddon, Councilman Jordan, Councilmember Gutierrez. So, first, I'd like to start by expressing our appreciation for all of the work of the Community Formation Committee. They certainly have led us to this point for this historic change here in Santa Barbara. Coming from the outside, I will tell you, coming into the new organization, a new city, I will provide the perspective that this is in fact historic. So I want us to keep in mind, and I want to see the momentum continuing to work forward, because I think this is a great opportunity. We're grateful for the collaboration with community leaders, all of our community organizations, city leadership, city staff in creating this new civilian oversight system as drafted in the ordinance that's been presented today. The Santa Barbara Police Department believes in the importance of strengthening community oversight, as well as additional review and oversight that Senate Bill 2 has created through the Post Commission. It's extremely important. I'm actually a sitting commissioner on Post, so I understand how important SB2 is and the other components that SB2 brings into oversight and the certification and decertification of officers. It's a whole nother new level of oversight at the state, completely independent as well, with the way the advisory commission is set up on top of the Post Commission. The men and women serving in the Santa Barbara Police Department are phenomenal public servants. I will tell you that. I'm honored to be here, but it is 100% what I have seen so far, and I'm sure I will continue to see here in our department. We're committed to ensuring the safety and vibrancy of the city, continuing to strengthen transparency and accountability among all of our diverse community members. This historic change for the city of Santa Barbara, it is change though, right? So there's always a level of uncertainty, the unknown. In police work, we say there's two things that police officers, like and dislike most. It's one common word, it's called change, right? We want change, but then we don't want change. I think that's just part of human nature. Change is hard, and like I said, the uncertainty always creates that. But I think by continuing to work through this uncertainty together, there's some real opportunity for true collective learning, what we're doing and how we evolve and how policing continues to evolve here in Santa Barbara is all extremely important, that we continue to sit with the hard, so to speak, and the change and work through it to continue to move this historic effort forward. So with that, we look forward to working with and supporting the new Fire and Police Commission, coordinating closely with the City Administrator's Office, meeting community expectations as well as the Fire and Police Commission as we move through this historic process. So I thank you and am looking forward to this discussion and direction on how we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. And with that, we will take questions from the Ordinance Committee. Councilmember Gutierrez?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Ms. Anderson, when it comes to, we've already met, and I just want to thank you for the time that you took to meet with us and go over all these things. But when it comes to your position, can you just discuss a little bit about the level of training you've had with like racial and gender equity?
Chair Sneddon and Councilmember Gutierrez, I've had extensive training for the positions that I've had over the course of my career. And so I will say it's unusual to be able to say with confidence that my 20 years of professional experience have all led up to this position. Starting with my concentration in international security and counterterrorism as part of my master's in public administration, as well as my work on the Institute for National Security and Counterterrorism, which has a lot of underlying tensions in terms of our Arab community, as well as other communities in regards to domestic terrorism, and likewise, from the Guantanamo Bay hearings, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, all my engagement with immigration and customs enforcement and ICE, really in terms of that background in crisis and in emergency management, yes, not specifically to race or gender, but absolutely a part of those initial trainings, all of my professional experience. And then as I transitioned to my work in Santa Barbara County, leading a disaster readiness initiative, I helped co-create a network of Latino disaster preparedness leaders. And so all of that was done and tailored to our Spanish-speaking communities. And so that experience of being immersed with hundreds of monolingual Spanish speakers and understanding how to engage with them directly, individually, as a community, meeting them where they're at, where they're comfortable, building trust and rapport with our first responders. As you know, with people in uniform and our communities of color, there is that distrust, and we worked to build that. So I've been part of that for 15 years. And also in my work in the nonprofit community, I've had trainings in implicit bias, white supremacy, LGBTQ+, as well as extensive leadership experience, leadership training, facilitation training, as well as training in program evaluation and assessment, all leading up to this role in this position. So my interactions with law enforcement specific, as well as the fire department, have been in the disaster preparedness, response, and recovery realm, which has enabled me to see our police department and fire department in very, very stressful circumstances, as well as the impact of natural disasters on communities of color, communities that are underserved, and really being able to shift how we respond and recover from disasters because of that. So again, both Although I do not have personal lived experience as a person of color, I have immersed myself, I have committed myself to understanding, learning, and evolving in every part of my career, as well as my personal life, as well as been part of formal trainings in that respect.
And do you have, well, let me rephrase this. Are you still willing to learn and take whatever education that's available to continue to gain a better understanding of other cultures and races and such?
Absolutely. Chair Sneddon and Councilmember Gutierrez, this work will only be effective and successful if we're consistently learning and evolving. So not only am I personally committed to that, but I am committed to supporting a commission that will be actively learning and evolving and engaging, understanding race relations, understanding historical tensions, understanding historical inequity, and making sure that we are proactive and that we're working with our first responder community and understanding those nuances. I think there has been comprehensive training with the police department and the fire department in that regard, but there's always more work to be done. Having experienced my first ride along last week and having only one officer during that patrol that was able to translate, there's things that we need to focus on, prioritize, and make sure that we're equipped as an entire community, as well as government agencies and departments, to be able to serve every single member of our community in a way that understands where they're coming from, is open and actively listening, and learning and adapting and building that trust and rapport. It's not a one-time commitment, it's an ongoing, and I hope you feel my sincerity and a commitment to learning, listening, and continuing to evolve in that regard.
As an employee here at the city for the years that you've been here, do you feel like we or the city encourages its employees to pursue trainings like this?
Chair Sneddon and Councilmember Gutierrez, I've been here for 4 months. It feels like 4 years in some regard. But in my short time, we have new leadership at the highest levels of our city, and that commitment is there, the priority is there. Vision 2030, we just really launched a new inclusivity, diversity, equity, and action initiative just last week among our managers and supervisors. We can always do more. We have to create the time to make those trainings happen because our day-to-day jobs are very intense. But absolutely, the support, the direction, the prioritization has all been communicated to me in terms of our leadership. Our processes, our communications, the fact that sometimes our Spanish translation can be delayed, our communication isn't always tailored to monolingual Spanish in communities. All of that is work that needs to be done, and you've heard from every level of staff that the commitment is there. We need more capacity and resources to make that happen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Gutierrez and Councilmember Jordan, please.
Thank you. I'd just like to, by the way, just bottle up that whole narrative and have it to share wherever I go, except pretty long, but that was a great narrative. Just a couple detail questions, really, because that's where the devil usually resides. So the part on that's, I didn't know dissentious was a word, so, but the part that is still a point of contention about former or current law enforcement, particularly, forget the firefighters for a moment, just the police part of it. Former or current law enforcement personnel, not just an officer, but it could be a civilian employee of the way I read that too. So I always look down at this stuff, and when you start putting descriptors on words such as sustained on finding and serious on misconduct, what does that really mean when it's time to determine it's misconduct or it's just a finding, or is it a serious finding? So just playing a little bit of devil's advocate, what does that become when we actually see it put into operational use?
Absolutely. Chair Sneddon and Councilmember Jordan, the sustained finding is particularly important because we want to allow for due process, right, and fairness. And the serious misconduct is actually a definition in terms of our sworn law enforcement officers, requirements by post and others, and specific, actually Mr. Doimus can speak to this as the Assistant City Attorney in terms of using that language with that specificity.
Sure.
Actually,
Chair,
Chief Gordon, did you want to say something
Oh,
as you
absolutely.
approach? Then, sorry, Mr. Doimus, we can transition. Yeah.
I think it's important to note, so sustained finding is a term within law enforcement that we're all very used to and comfortable with. It means that we support the finding that it happened. So it's considered a sustained finding. And with that, because of the way SB 2 works, serious misconduct is actually defined within Senate Bill 2. So there are 9 areas of misconduct that are specifically identified in SB 2. And whereas before, each agency was keeping those records, now those records are actually going to have to go to post, which means we will be able to, for members that were in law enforcement, we'll be able to know what those sustained findings were in terms of those 9 areas that are considered serious misconduct for SB 2. So I think, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, the intention is to create a system that we can define it, that is something that we're not just relying on, the individual to tell us. We will be able to research that and know ourselves, and we don't get into an issue where we have to ask the prior agency where they worked for personnel records or anything. We will be entitled to it through SB 2 through post, and there is a standard set of what those 9 serious misconduct are. And just so you know, the 9, and I'm going to refer to my notes just so I don't forget any. So the first one is dishonesty, and it's relating to the reporting, investigation, or prosecution of a crime. There's several different things within it, and includes any tampering with body-worn camera or other recording devices, filing false police reports, concealing evidence. There's a whole long list that goes just into that first area of misconduct. So if someone had what we would call a sustained finding, so that means the evidence showed in terms of the investigation that it happened, that sustained finding, and someone that had a dishonesty, that category would not be eligible to be on the Police and Fire Commission, or Fire and Police Commission. The second one is abuse of power, not limited to intimidating a witness, obtaining false statements, making a false arrest. The third one is physical abuse, which includes excessive or unreasonable force. The fourth is sexual assault, and that's actually specifically described in 832.7 B of the Penal Code. The fifth is demonstrating bias on the basis of race, national origin, religion, gender identity, expression, housing status, sexual orientation, medical or physical disability, or other protected status. So that is a very broad category when we talk about making sure that someone does not, have a sustained finding of any type of bias. So that is included in serious misconduct. Number 6 is acts that violate the law and are sufficiently egregious or repeated as to be inconsistent with a peace officer's obligation to uphold the law or respect the rights of members of the public. And that one is actually broad because it also gives the commission some broader powers when they look at each of those cases. Participation in a law enforcement gang, the section specifically describes what that is and what those markers are. Number 8 is failure to cooperate with an investigation of potential misconduct, including with an agency, an outside agency, requesting an officer to provide information. And the last is failure to intercede when you observe force by another that's clearly beyond necessity. So there's a lot of things, but there's a reasonable and objective standard to that. So those are the 9 areas of serious misconduct defined by SB 2 that those all now will be reported to post and available when you have a new commissioner, as you look at potential commissioners. So the sustained finding means that one of those of serious misconduct, one of those 9 was in fact what they were deemed to have violated. And the other thing to note is that by the time it goes through all of this, it has gone through all of the, depending on the city or county, civil service and all these other things, those are, those have all gone through the whole process and have been completely vetted. So you're getting what should be very reliable information to make your decisions in terms of appointments to the commission.
Mr. Dormus, anything to
Yeah,
add on that, or?
I was just going to, Chief Gordon did an excellent job explaining it. My only add to that, that's exactly the source, Chair Sneddon, Councilmember Jordan, and the CFC in their meetings had a discussion. So they wanted to define what's, misconduct is. You don't want to disqualify an officer for maybe being tardy to briefing meetings, that's something but, what do we define misconduct and what is serious? And beyond just an allegation, as the chief said, something that has been sustained, proven, determined by the agency or even subsequent administrative hearings that had occurred. And these are ones that not only, if they're worthy enough for decertification of an officer, they should be worthy enough to disqualify a member for this commission, because it would definitely undermine the integrity of the commission in the future.
So I'll apologize, because I'm just going to ask a bunch of really granular questions, because, most of this goes to entrustment by people in this process that have had their trust betrayed. And I'm not one of them. So it's just, I certainly feel a responsibility to do it. So if this process happened in our police department, the way I understand the serious misconduct, SB2, is that sets up a group of categories and has, let's call them qualifications or qualifiers for something you did wrong. And then the sustained finding part is, for lack of a better word, a hearing where the evidence is presented on that and a determination is then made on whether it meets those qualifiers for those 9 categories. Is that a good way to put it in Mike's brain?
Probably to put it in your brain, yes. The sustained finding means that a complete investigation was done.
Yep.
And as a result of the investigation, we sustain the finding.
Yep.
And serious misconduct for purposes of what we're reporting to post, one of those 9 categories, that information must be given to post. And once January 1st comes, not only do we have to report sustained findings, we actually have to report any allegation, whether it's sustained or not, within 10 days of the allegation being made. So whether the allegation comes into the police department or it comes in through the city administrator's office, anytime we get an allegation that would fall into one of those 9, within 10 days, starting January 1st, we have to report that to post.
Okay.
And at the end of the investigation, regardless of what the finding is, we have to let them know what the finding was.
And then who's making that sustained finding?
Sustained findings ultimately are made within the department. So we review it all. There's a process, an internal affairs investigation process. Ultimately, the old saying, the buck stops here, the buck stops right here.
Yeah, let me give you another example. So, because you mentioned one of them in one of those categories was a member of a law enforcement gang. And I know you've been in the big city. So I just know what I read in the paper. So I'll just give you that caveat. But you couldn't convince me that law enforcement gangs don't exist in some bigger cities, particularly probably in sheriff's departments and south of us. And so how does our process then address a misconduct that's defined in some way as participation or membership in a law enforcement gang being decided internally whether or not that is a sustained finding by members of the same unit that are participating in a law enforcement gang. That whole decision is an inside decision. What, if anything, are we doing to make sure that that doesn't take place here?
Ultimately, it's not just an internal decision.
Okay.
So we work hand in hand with the city administrator's office and HR, Human Resources, on all of these complaints. So if we had such a complaint come in, because it is within members of our department, and it's a very serious allegation, more than likely, and this is hypothetical, the decision would be made, also in conjunction with talking with the city attorney, to have an outside investigator do that investigation. I, as chief, can tell you, if I receive that allegation, there is no way we would do it and handle that internally. We would do an complete outside investigation of those allegations.
Okay, and then if that finding was made as sustained, and it goes into this, it's a state database, then how will council find out, or how will this be vetted when somebody applies for a position on the commission?
So I'll let Barbara speak to that, but, that would all go, there would be a sustained finding that would show you that is in fact what they were, I don't want to use the verb, that there was a sustained finding, and all of those are public record, and we will be able to access that. So as each of the applicants for the commission, come up, and through the vetting office, through the city, those would all be vetted. But that information would be available through post to us because of the way in which SB2 works.
Okay.
And Chair Sneddon and Councilmember Jordan, there would also be a background check on each individual as you select them. We can't do it for all applicants depending on the number of applicants, but we are absolutely committed as an internal team to make sure that that additional vetting is facilitated on each of the appointed commissioners.
Okay. Then, in your experience, Chief, how long does that process take to an allegation, and then the process to determine that there is or is not a sustained finding? What's the period of time?
By law, we have a year to conduct our investigation.
Okay. So you can stop there. So what avenue do we have to be noticed as part of an applicant that, regardless of innocence or guilt, that they are involved in a process that could lead to a sustained finding?
So I just want to clarify that as part of this, I don't think we're suggesting that we would put any current.
Yeah, Chair Sneddon and Councilmember Jordan, the charter limits us to that current members or employees of the city of Santa Barbara cannot apply to serve on the commission. But yes, I suppose there could be a circumstance where an active duty officer from another jurisdiction could apply to be a commissioner. We have, I would say, because of legal counsel, have landed on sustained finding versus active investigation, because there are a number of complaints that are not sustained, unfounded, unsubstantiated, they're exonerated from that complaint. So we really just want to allow for due process. So you're correct in that we would not be aware of active investigations of that individual, but I am assuming with the current leadership of council and future leadership that active duty law enforcement serving on the commission, just given the time, workload, capacity to serve in that position, might be other considerations weighed by council in terms of that applicant's eligibility and capacity to serve.
And if I may add to Chair Sneddon and Councilmember Jordan, we understand the sensitivity of this issue. As I mentioned, having someone with serious misconduct undermines everything. And I think what you're looking for as well, could there be a loophole of someone? And conceivably, yes, you could have someone current law enforcement outside of our agencies that have a current investigation that we may not be privy to. You could have someone maybe who had a history 15, 20 years ago who may still be employed, and we wouldn't be able to have information because SB2 wouldn't have that reach, or the Public Records Act under SB 1421 or SB 16 wouldn't have that reach. So that's where it's incumbent on city staff to provide and ask those questions. You know, if the officer or firefighter does not want to answer them, as with their right, it probably would be noted, and it's a consideration for, you know, the council to consider, because we do recognize that, yes, there is potential for having someone of misconduct happen in South Bend, Indiana. You know, it could happen conceivably here, but that's where we entrust staff to vet this process as we do this application process, to be able to have as much information as possible.
And then, is it legal to ask such a question during the appointment process by elected officials? And, I mean, then you would have the situation, maybe the person would say, I don't want to answer it, or I would answer it, and we could then choose. I mean, they could fess up, they could not fess up, we could gauge their answer. The appointment is clearly up to my one vote, however I want to vote that, regardless of what is known or not known. Is that correct?
Correct, Chair Stoner and Councilmember Jordan. We could require that, because it goes to the heart of the circuit, you know, the commission we're dealing with. That, you know, again, having someone with serious misconduct would undermine this, because how would you not only have public trust, but how would you even have departmental trust in an officer with serious misconduct overseeing and making recommendations for the rest of this police department? And so we are able to ask those questions, and particularly for that type of profession, or those two professions, due to what the nature of this is involved. So there are no additional rights. This isn't employment. This is volunteering on a commission, where we're relying on these commissioners to be part of this process of helping the community, making recommendations to process. So we are able to ask these questions, and Barbara and I would be working on that.
And I'm not trying to magnify that there's a potential here that this commission would be taken over all of a sudden, but
No, but,
certainly
yeah.
the worry is historically anyhow, just the example you just gave, what happens in Indiana when an officer gets fired for misconduct or resigns pending a determination of misconduct is, up until now, wasn't necessarily known where he or she got their next job states away, right? That was a credible issue, right?
Yes, it happened once before, so it definitely could happen
Okay.
again. So our goal would be to vet those.
And Chair Sneddon and Councilmember Jordan, we will be revising the application to the Fire and Police Commission once the ordinance is adopted, to align with the requirements, membership qualifications, and disqualifications in the ordinance.
Okay. Then I just have one more simple question, okay? So you talked about, again, and we've talked about this privately, the kind of the overarching, the role of an ordinance as being overarching, and that there's work product as a result of that ordinance. You mentioned the IPM role, the complaint process. There's probably scads of other work. You know, no good deeds going unpunished for you, so you're not done yet. What is the process for that will have a venue where the public and or particular stakeholders can participate? So normally policies and procedures don't come and sit in here to be talked about, but would each of those, as you develop those, would each of those then have a public appearance for discussion and recommendation back to your office at the Fire and Police Commission? Is that the way you envision that?
Chair Sneddon and Councilmember Jordan, there's a couple of key components that are part of our process moving forward. One is that an audit has been initiated of critical components of the work of the commission and the police department. So the findings and recommendations from that audit will be presented both the Fire Police Commission as well as the members of City Council and Mayor. It is how we prioritize those recommendations, addressing them will be incorporated in the work plan of the Fire and Police Commission. And then the work plan itself will be co-created with support from assigned staff to the commission and the city administrator's office, presented to City Council for your feedback, your input. There could perhaps be weighing in of reprioritization of those areas and approval of that work plan to council. So not only is the Fire and Police Commission being elevated to City Council chambers and televised, But every engagement between the commission and the council in terms of advising you and providing recommendations to council will all be in a public forum.
Okay, great, thank you. Thanks for letting me
If
have
I-
all
And
that
if I
time.
may, Councilmember Sun, Councilmember Jordan, too, besides the unique aspect of a work plan, most commissions, even the Fire and Police Commission, have a policy and procedures process already. It's on their website. The problem is, the last time it was updated was 1981. So we obviously imagine, where a lot of the information is, as Barbara did her excellent presentation, talk about a lot of the stuff that you're going to see really even more detailed oriented information's not contained in the ordinance. That's where it is. There is a document existing, but obviously it's going to have to go through robust revisions, or basically an entire new document, which will be approved also by the Fire and Police Commission.
Right. I know you're getting my gist, that at the end of that is not a present, in quotes, to the community, that the end result is a byproduct of us and the community, right? So I know you get that.
Absolutely. Chair Sutton and Councilmember Jordan, please know that underlying all of this is a much broader community engagement strategy along every part of the implementation process, as well as the work of the commission. So even how we do that through website, how we engage through social media, how we educate and bring people to commission meetings to understand the topics, the trainings, everything that's being facilitated, and the availability of those policies and procedures, we are working on really making that much more accessible and tailored as we move forward. So there's additional work beyond just the deliverables of the commission that's happening. Yeah.
Thank you, and I'll just ask a couple questions here and being mindful that we still have public comment as well. So to start with, I just have questions about legally for qualifications or disqualifications, how we could exclude some types, like criminal history, but say that we can't legally exclude other types, such as law enforcement. Those don't square with me. I don't really understand how we can do one and not the other.
I'd be happy, Chair Stun and Ordinance Committee, to answer that question. I think, looking at the issue, you could have an ordinance that excludes certain membership, whether it's professional, et cetera, as long as you're not excluding based on a class, right? Now, the legal challenge to that would be a First Amendment challenge in terms of having, access, participation to government. But then you look at what is the strong governmental interest in having these exclusions, as long as it's not based on a protected class. And, you could say our argument can be for true independence, an independent body, independent from that profession, independent from, having, criminal history due to the nature of this. So that's the balance you have to do, looking at the First Amendment issue on it, and what is the strong governmental substantial interest for having that. We looked at that. Obviously, there's a strong governmental interest in having officers or firefighters who have been in the profession who've had serious misconduct, because there's a strong governmental interest from precluding those, because, again, like as I mentioned, it would undermine, the integrity of it, on all ends. Every stakeholder, in their eyes, would undermine it. So then you're looking at criminal history. Just like with public employment, you don't automatically can exclude a person just because they have a felony or misdemeanor. We follow recent state law, as well as our ordinance, which predated this, that now coincides with that, is, well, you look at mitigating factors when you have criminal history. What was the length of the time of the occurrence, the nature of it, what recidivism has happened since that time. And so those are factors you can look at. So you look at our exclusions. We have one exclusion being members in these professions or anywhere else in the public with serious misconduct, because it's a Fire and Police Commission. You want to, protect the integrity of that commission if they are to advise and have this important role. The second is you're looking at criminal history. You're not fully excluding, but you're looking at mitigating factors. Obviously, the third exclusion in the ordinance is someone who is an attorney who is planning to sue either department. That's obviously a financial conflict of interest too, as well. So that is why we're very limited in that, because we're aware of those First Amendment issues, and we felt most comfortable with these 3 exclusions and not expanding it beyond there due to the recognition of First Amendment. Because the counter argument could be someone, you know, how can you automatically proclaim someone with a bias if their spouse served in law enforcement? You know, I'm not saying it can't be shown in the strong governmental interest, but as staff, we didn't want to present that to the ordinance committee because of the automatic presumption of it. I think it's, you know, it's too presumptive to make that announcement.
And Chair Snyder, I want to say in layman speak, we are not excluding anyone in terms of eligibility for criminal history. It's considerations for criminal history.
Okay,
It's
so
the serious misconduct that we have itemized.
I'll refrain from discussion, but you said the words, the true independence of the body, and that is my goal. I think that's everybody's goal. And to me, this consideration is very different if it was going to be a commission of 7 people or 15 people, then one person with a particular experience would be adding to a collective of voices, but it's limited to 5 members. And to me, then any one is a swing vote or a different perspective. So if you could help me understand, you know, in the room with the 5 commissioners, there will be law enforcement helping to inform and support the commission. So that voice is there, that perspective is present. So I'm still having difficulty understanding why we would exclude, and I'm not suggesting that we have somebody with criminal history on the commission either. I'm just trying to look at the 2 endpoints of experience, and I'll give for myself, I'm a teacher. I may never have a claim against me, sustained or otherwise. I may never have to go through a process, but if I'm sitting on a committee that's overseeing other teachers, there's no question that I'm filtering through, my experience with that. And I think that it doesn't protect the integrity of the commission and the true independence, just optics alone. So I need help with understanding the one end member, but not another end member. And if we want true independence of this body of only 5 members, why we couldn't put that added prioritization, just like with criminal history.
Sure, let Ms. Anderson expound upon it, but I just want to make sure, the first question is in terms of criminal history, right, why we have that. We follow the Muni Code we do for public employment, because if you look at our organizational chart, you look at it, we're city council and then boards and commissions, then you look at, you know, city administrator, city attorney, and so on. So boards and commissions are part of the organizational structure of a city. And so when we apply those rules or dynamics for public employment, we're mimicking the same rules as we are for a commission member, that they are not, the key is they're not automatically excluded because they have a history of a misdemeanor or felony, that they should be, you know, that they still should be considered for a position, and these are factors that should guide someone. Maybe you don't want to have someone with serious, most recent within a month, you know, multiple felonies. Maybe that would not be the most ideal, but someone when they were young and have had a history of service in the community, why wouldn't that experience and that view be really beneficial? I mean, I think everyone, you know, talking even to the police department, they find that viewpoint very important. So no one is excluding that. So at least that answers at least why, you know, we're looking at criminal history. We're mimicking what we do organizationally for the entire city anyway. As far as we mentioned, you know, the officers, like I said, we look at the city charter. We look at how the charter was made, we vote by the people, and it was, you know, it's very limited in number of 5 people. It's very inclusive because it only eliminates really 2 categories. If you're a current employee due to the conflict of interest, and you must be an elector in the city. Outside of that, it doesn't really contain any provisions or exclusions. So with that in mind, keeping with that ideology in mind, we want it to be very minimal when we created this ordinance in terms of interfering with adding more and more exclusions. Like I said, my point and argument is it's more of a First Amendment issue if you're excluding and extending it to any either local Santa Barbara County law enforcement or their families, you know, the one counter argument being made, 'cause it's not a protected class, again, being that, you know, it's seeking true independence. I don't know, you know, if someone would bring a challenge, if that argument would win the day, but I'm saying that would be at least our argument from a First Amendment standpoint. And I don't know if Barbara wanted to add
Chair
anything.
Sneddon, I just wanted to clarify that the chief of police, the fire chief, the staff assigned to the commission are there per the request and needs of the commission, right? So we're directed to advise, to report, to help provide information, to answer questions, but we are not part of the decision-making process. So having someone who is a former law enforcement officer part of the decision-making process, I have observed commissions that have that inclusion and commissions that have the exclusion. I've also had many conversations with professionals and colleagues, new colleagues, at the NACOL annual conference, and it is exactly where we have landed today, which is there is support for having that experience on commissions. Those professionals that I engage with say it's completely valuable and beneficial to that discourse, the decision-making process. And a lot of ordinance don't even have exclusions for serious misconduct. I mean, we are leaning into really big areas already, and it landing where it may, but it is under the purview of council to make those selections.
Thank you, and that's what I want to clarify is what's the recommendation and what we're allowed. So when you say that you've talked to commissions that have the exclusion and commissions that don't have the exclusion, that makes me think, oh, so we could have the
Yes.
exclusion. It is
Yes.
allowed. And that's my question is,
Yes.
could we, not whether it's advisable or not? Because I see the
Yes.
benefit, I can see the benefit both ways. I just want to know very clearly the parameters of can or cannot.
Yes.
We could.
Yes.
We could. That's, thank you. And then, just a question, could we put a name to the position of independent monitor role in the city administrator's office? I do feel your sincerity, and I completely support your qualifications as an individual, but it's not codified, the position, anywhere in the ordinance, and my concern is what would be different from what already is in place, that the city administrator already is the oversight of police chief. So that's already in place. So if there's not a position named or a independent monitor position or role within the city administrator's office, then I'm not seeing how this couldn't just flux over time in a way that we didn't anticipate.
Chair Sneddon, it is for the purposes of fluxing over time. I'll be honest with you. It really is, it's new for these responsibilities to be included in a position in the city administrator's office. We want to be open to assessing that workload, managing the roles and responsibilities. We also are bringing on independent police monitor professional expertise. The guidance of that expertise could, again, help us learn and evolve in terms of the roles and responsibilities of the position, meeting commissioner expectations and needs, meeting community expectations and needs. So I have outlined the roles and responsibilities as per the recommendations from the CFC into this position, and that will be part of policies and procedures. But naming that in the ordinance, again, would require us to come back to you if there were any shifts or evolutions or recommendations on either increasing capacity, designating the role differently, having that role be a contracted position versus a full-time position. But as you know, the commitment is that it will be part of this position, the senior assistant to the city administrator, and we will report back to council any recommendations on shifting or changing that.
Okay, thank you. But it doesn't say senior assistant to the city
No.
administrator in the ordinance, and I'm not suggesting it does. I'm suggesting, or asking, could it say something like the independent monitor role in the city administrator's office, and then it's outside of the ordinance that we're defining who is currently in that position of the independent monitor role. As you assess, as it changes, it may flex, it may change, and I'm not suggesting we put the whole job description here in the ordinance, but it's a little bit overly vague to me the other direction of just city administrator's office, because that's no different than what's currently in place.
Chair Sneddon, I'd hear you and willing to take in that feedback absolutely from the ordinance committee to make those adjustments. We do have some references to the independent police monitor role in the city administrator's office, not just the city administrator's office. We also have reference to the city administrator per the chartered commission guidelines and qualifications. So we can make those accommodations. We had references to the senior assistant to the city administrator, and it was per community feedback, specifically feedback from the Community Formation Commission that actually enabled that edit to be incorporated, that it was more general. It was allowing for more flexibility and adaptation moving forward.
Thank you. And I think in discussion, maybe we could talk about that more too, but I think just something delineating, maybe not the senior assistant, but just the role, the independent monitor role in the city administrator's office that could be fulfilled any number of ways over time. And then the question about the addition of language in the ordinance that's specific to fire and police. And I have a concern, and you can help me with this. Has the fire department seen this? Have they weighed in on it? It hasn't been through a public process in the same way. Are they supportive? I don't know, we sort of lumped fire in because it went to the Fire and Police Commission. But if you could speak to that.
Yes, I'd met with Chief Males, detailing the shifts and changes in the ordinance, as well as the public information officer, again, on that community engagement piece. There has been full support for including fire department in the draft of the ordinance and the civilian oversight model, as well as, again, the willingness to work together in coordination on training and orientation and other key pieces. I also presented to the current Fire and Police Commission with the fire chief present, as well as those commissioners being able to weigh in on including the fire department and the civilian oversight system as well, and that was well received.
Okay, thank you. And then just one last question about requiring ride-alongs or other immersive experiences. And it was my understanding through past conversations that other immersive experiences could be not exactly comparable, of course, but could be acceptable. And I have a lot of hesitancy about requiring a ride-along for a variety of reasons. Could we not include or other acceptable immersive experiences?
Chair Sneddon, there are absolutely other training experiences that can be facilitated with commissioners if they're uncomfortable participating in a ride-along. We are leaning into requiring that ride-along because there is not an equivalent immersive experience. So having participated myself, speaking with others that have participated, it absolutely is the best possible opportunity to understand the day-to-day work of our law enforcement officers. But of course, and the reference to accommodations is meant to be more general. We'll have 5 commissions. It's the commitment from the city attorney's office as well as myself to work with each of those commissioners. If there is a discomfort, let's work on addressing that discomfort. Can we build trust? Can we build rapport? I can join them on the ride along. You know, we're happy to make accommodations as necessary to meet their comfort level.
So maybe instead of the word require, we could have prioritize, encourage, any number of words other than require. I wouldn't want it to be a barrier to serving on the commission, that maybe that trust isn't built yet, or whatever that requirement. It just seems that there are other immersive experiences, and I believe that was put forward by previous law enforcement who I spoke with, or who spoke with the commission, that it was entirely possible to have other immersive experiences. So,
Yes, Chair Senate, there is the availability of other immersive experiences. Yes, equivalent is the area of debate.
okay, thank you. And if there are no further questions at this time, let's hear public comment. Do we have any public comment online? We'll take in the chambers first, but yeah.
We currently have 3 individuals online. At this time, their hands are not raised.
Okay.
So we can announce now, if they'd like to speak on this item, please raise your hand within the app. We'll take the public commenters that are here now first.
Okay, thank you. So we will start with Louisa Wood, followed by Barney Malekian. And you'll have 3 minutes.
Is this on? Hi. Well, I was going to say good morning, but it's now good afternoon, city councilmen, city staff, and all. As many of you know, my name is Louisa Wood, and I served on the Community Formation Commission, and I currently serve on the Fire and Police Commission for the city of Santa Barbara. I would like to start off by saying thank you to the team members of the city administrator's office for working so hard to develop the draft ordinance language you all have before you today. I know from experience how much work it's involved to get us to this place, and I appreciate the tremendous effort you have put in. So thank you. I must say, I'm sure this will not be a surprise to hear that this draft ordinance is unfortunately not fully in line with what I had envisioned as effective oversight based on the recommendations developed by this Community Formation Commission for City Council. I do feel, however, that this draft we have today put forth by the City Administrator's Office is movement forward towards civilian oversight. It is progress. Now it is time for the city and you all, councilmen, to make this oversight system work effectively for our community, to build trust and collaboration for all stakeholders. Having said this, there seems to be a few points throughout the city's draft ordinance language that may have been inadvertently omitted by the city, which I asked to be addressed by council. You have asked questions about that today already. Mr. Gabe Escobedo, Ms. Rachel Johnson, and myself submitted to you all a red line version to the ordinance draft addressing these concerns I have. The recommended changes submitted to the ordinance committee came from nearly 14 months of painstaking research and work from the Community Formation Commission, information received from over 1,000 people in our community, received from public outreach efforts completed by the Community Formation Commission via surveys and focus groups, and from public input process put forth by the city. We ask that you strongly consider making these changes to the draft. The overarching themes of our changes include adding some specific language to give more input and agency to the future members of the Fire and Police Commission overall, and adding what was just discussed, language regarding the job title and or description of the police monitor position housed in the city administrator's office was included in the ordinance to ensure that this integral part of effective oversight will continue now and through the future of this commission for our city. Without this police monitor position, this commission will lose its effectiveness for our city and will be oversight in name only. Thank you for your consideration, councilman, and thank you, city staff. Let's move forward and make progress for our beloved city. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And former Chief Barney Malekian.
Councilmember Snedden and members of the committee stand before you today to express my strong support for the proposed ordinance, which replaces responsibility for the police oversight with the Fire and Police Commission. I believe I can offer you a balanced perspective based on my experience as the police chief for 2 municipalities, as well as serving as the director for the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, which required me to visit police and sheriff's departments around the country. It was in that role that I created and implemented the concept of collaborative reform. Collaborative reform is, the premise is that the community and the department together identify the problems that need to be addressed and publicly commit to implementing agreed upon solutions. Collaborative reform is successfully instituted initially in Las Vegas and ultimately in several jurisdictions around the country, including Spokane and Philadelphia. I tell you this to remind you that I'm not here simply as someone who served 17 months as your interim police chief, but rather as someone who spent nearly 50 years in law enforcement, 26 as a chief executive, and as someone who has been involved for many years in reforming disciplinary processes and helping to fashion oversights in jurisdictions around the country, including Seattle and New Orleans. Oversight has 3 essential purposes. One is to provide the community with the means to express concerns either about the conduct of individual officers or broader concerns regarding policy and practice without needing to directly contact the department. Secondly, to provide a forum where the police department can and must address those concerns publicly. And third, to be a system structured in a fashion where the men and women who do the actual work of law enforcement can be assured that their work will be judged in a manner that is both impartial and transparent. And the oversight model must have 2 essential characteristics. Its processes and deliberations must be transparent to the public, to the police department, and to the elected body. And secondly, it must be collaborative in nature. The police department must have a venue for explaining controversial incidents that occur while understanding that the body will drill deeply into the facts and background of that incident. And the members of the oversight body must understand the complexity and difficulties that individual officers face in the course of their duties, which is really the justification for ride-along experience. The ultimate purpose of oversight should be to achieve systemic change rather than merely the achievement of compliance. During the months of the deliberation by the CFC, there was nearly universal acknowledgement as to the quality and high level by the officers of performance by the officers of our department. It was also acknowledged that the primary objective in developing oversight for an agency that is not experiencing significant problems should be to build something that will prevent such problems from emerging. The recommendations by city staff incorporate the recommendations of the work of the CFC meet the challenge of providing a locally appropriate model of oversight. During my tenure as your interim chief, I made it clear that I strongly supported the development of the oversight process. My position has not changed, and I believe that the proposals being brought forward by the city and staff are in the best interest of both the community and the city. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your service. I think we have a question possibly from Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief. I have a question in regards to the suggestion of not having sworn police officers or law enforcement be a part of the oversight. So from my experience in the ride-along, I, for one, can speak that it was eye-opening to see what law enforcement have to deal with. I chose to go on New Year's Eve because when speaking to law enforcement, I asked what day would be a good day to go, and they said holidays, and I said, but which one in particular? And they said, if you want to get a lot of what we deal with over any given day of the year condensed in one day, then New Year's would be a good one. So I did, and in doing so, I got to ask a lot of questions, was kind of the point, and observe how they operate. And one thing that I took away was when asked how their day-to-day life outside the uniform, how is that? Certain things were said to me as it's hard for them to turn off being a police officer even when they take off the uniform. And they also said that after becoming an officer, your friends become officers. So when you get to it seems to me that once you become a sworn law enforcement officer, that is your life. Like, that is your friend group, that is your family. So you now being a retired officer or law enforcement, is there anything to help, I guess, in the lack of a better way of saying it, deprogram that from these people that are no longer sworn officers of law? Or is that still, like, is that in you for life? Because it does reflect in this issue about having former sworn police officers serve on this commission.
Councilmember Gutierrez and Chair Sneddon, I think those are valid observations. I think this business about having your circle sort of that closed is true in the earlier portions of your career, not later as time goes on. And two things as it relates to serving on the commission. One is I think everybody has agreed that no active duty law enforcement would be on the commission anyway. And I've never been opposed to the idea of saying that anybody that served at the Santa Barbara Police Department shouldn't be on this commission. But I would remind the committee and the council that the ultimate decision about who serves on the commission rests with you anyway. And so you're going to look at the individual characteristics of the applicants and decide for yourself. But if time has passed, and there was a significant discussion about how much time, but if time has passed, I think that sort of closed circle concept that you describe is definitely diminished, and I think it also, quite frankly, it diminishes with age.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And next we have Gabe Escobedo, followed by Mark Corbett.
Good afternoon, Chair Sneddon, council members. My name is Gabe Escobedo. I was previously the chair of the Community Formation Commission. I too, this was not my preferred path for civilian oversight in the city of Santa Barbara. And there's a lot of work to do to elevate the Fire and Police Commission to have standing in the community so that it's viewed as what it should be, a place for people to go, and for true transparency of the Santa Barbara Police Department. With that being said, I do think that this is progress, and I do support the ordinance. I want to commend staff for their effort to get feedback from the CFC. They made an earnest effort, and I think they should be acknowledged for their efforts. You received a redline version of the recommendation with modest changes that we believe substantively bring this ordinance closer to our recommendation. I think a couple of things to keep in mind. While it may be implicit that the Fire and Police Commission will have input on training and policies and structure of the Fire and Police Commission once it's seated, I think explicitly saying it in there is important for community members to know the role of the actual Fire and Police Commission in the development of such processes and trainings. I think we also need to keep in mind it's not only actual legitimacy, it's perceived legitimacy, and the perception from the community that when things come to the Fire and Police Commission, that they're going to be weighed as they should be without undue influence. And when we're talking about the restrictions of former law enforcement, the Community Formation Commission came to the consensus that it was the County of Santa Barbara. If you were a former law enforcement outside of the County of Santa Barbara, you were eligible to apply for the oversight body. And that was a recognition that there does come a benefit of the perception of previously being law enforcement. But with former Santa Barbara Police Department or county sheriffs, there also comes a bias or the possibility of bias, and that eats away at that perceived legitimacy that I think is really important to keep in mind. One thing was mentioned today that was not in the ordinance. It was background checks. I have a huge concern about background checks for members of the Fire and Police Commission. I think if you had background checks for the CFC, you would not have had the same membership. I'd be willing to bet everything on that. And so I would strongly weigh the benefits and the drawbacks of requiring background checks for the Fire and Police Commission. But in summary, I hope that you take our modest changes and you implement them into the ordinance. This is progress. Again, I want to commend city staff and thank you for all of your work to the city and to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your work. And I think we have a follow-up question from Council Member Oscar Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So your suggestion about not having law enforcement from Santa Barbara County or served in Santa Barbara County?
Served in Santa Barbara County. So if you served for the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department or Lompoc Police Department or Santa Maria Police Department, that would preclude you from applying to this commission. And as you heard from Mr. Malekian, the discussion, really, the contention was never about whether or not Santa Barbara Police Department former employees would be eligible for this commission. Was really what about the whole county, because there are those relationships in the county of working with one another. We oftentimes have Sheriff's Department in the city of Santa Barbara working side by side, and those relationships, as you highlighted, do play a role in decision-making. And so we thought it would be a good move to move in that direction. We had a former law enforcement officer from the city of Oakland on the CFC, and it was valuable. We think that perspective is valuable, but we also want to temper it with mitigating some of the biases that might enter into the process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Mark Corbett. Welcome.
Good afternoon, council members. I hadn't planned on being here today, but I thought it was important to come and represent the sworn men and women of the Santa Barbara Police Department. So first, let me start off by thanking you and Ms. Anderson and Chief Gordon and everybody who's participated for having the opportunity to speak before you today, but most importantly for all the work and thoughtful consideration that's gone into everything that led up to today. So just to introduce myself, my name is Mark Corbett. I've been a police officer. I've had the privilege of being a police officer in the city of Santa Barbara for 22 years now. I grew up in this community. My parents still live in the home I grew up in. So this community is important to me, as it is to many of the men and women that serve this city. I'm also the Vice President of the Police Officers Association. It's my honor to represent the 142 members of that association here today. And so I come to you with that perspective. This community is special, and there's a special relationship between this community and the men and women who serve as police officers in this city. I can speak to that from direct experience and also witnessing it amongst my brothers and sister officers as well. I often tell prospective police officers that come on ride-alongs or investigate our department to consider for a possible place for their careers how special this department is and how special the relationship with our community is. I feel like it's something that sets us apart from other organizations and other communities, and I say that with all sincerity. There's been a lot of talk about ride-alongs. I have had the benefit of having been on the other side of the ride-along experience, being the officer in the driver's seat and sharing a shift with prospective council members in some cases, citizens who just want to see how their police department operates, or quite often young people who are investigating a career in law enforcement and looking into the possibility of starting that career in Santa Barbara. And that's one of the things that I stress with them is that special relationship. This is not Baltimore, this is not Chicago, this is not Detroit, it's not Los Angeles. This is a different community, and the Police Officers Association has never opposed oversight. We believe in oversight, but the appropriate oversight. And I don't want to restate many of the things that have been said more eloquently by former Chief Malekian. We agree with him, and he's spoken quite well in the past and today. So we just want to agree on many of the points that he made. Also, we believe that this department has earned this level of oversight by the nature of, or the frequency or the lack of frequency of many of the complaints that often come about in law enforcement. I believe that it was 2021 that we had single-digit complaints. And even still, if you look at past years and the average, I believe those complaints average, give or take, 20 or so a year, which is extremely low for a police department. And that's a source of pride for the men and women of this department. So as I stand here before you to represent those officers, I want to urge you to adopt the ordinance as submitted, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your service as well. And we have public commenters who are online.
And Chair Sneddon, we have 2 individuals online but do not have their hands raised at this time.
Okay. At this time, then, we will, it's back to the Ordinance Committee for comments. I have comments. I'm sure we each have comments. Does anybody want to go first? Or okay, Councilmember Jordan.
So I'll just say generally, I'm in agreement with staff's version and I know that's not going to be the case everywhere sitting up here, so probably best way is just me get that out of the way, and then everybody can start to wordsmith this thing a little more. But just a couple points as a setup to come back again next week, potentially, which I think is assuredly probably. I agree with including clarifying wording changes that, I guess just from our standpoint, don't change the substance, but increase the explanation, and in particular, one of the comments I heard, improve the perception. Part of this end product isn't just a bureaucratic document, but it's also something that has to be sold in some cases, both sold to both sides of the fence. Has to be sold to those who think there's absolutely nothing wrong with the police department and they're always right, and it has to be sold to the other side that says, no, we're digging out of a hole totally all our life. And so, as always, I'm somewhere in the middle, so I'm a little more trusting, but I realize I get the emails all the time. There's arguments on both sides that you're wasting a whole bunch of time, money, and resources for something we don't need, and that I know the other is true also, that there's certainly a need and there's certainly a reason for it. So I don't really see any harm on going back through that and comparing the red line version that was delivered yesterday versus our version, and just coming back with some suggestions on where clarifying language could be in agreement with us, because it doesn't change the substance of the ordinance, but just improves it both in the perception and and basically speaking to people outside baseball rather than inside baseball. I know others are going to talk about this, so I'll just tell you my opinion. I don't have a problem with the ride-along language as it exists now. I'm trusting of staff that probably more rather than less of potential candidates or those who are appointed will have no problem with doing a ride-along and will probably welcome it. And I'm trusting that we will accommodate those who have a problem with it. And I didn't really like your examples of accommodation, because I think there's other accommodations that you're not talking about. You know, me or you going to sit in the back seat while they're sitting in the front seat, I don't think accomplishes accommodation. So I think what we're really looking for there is an accommodation that does not put them in a police car on an 8-hour shift. And I'm okay with that, because I think that's not going to be a common situation. And it's, you know, as a result of this conversation, it's certainly going to be a question I ask at the interviews if it's a problem up front. And I think that's a credible question to ask at the interviews. Are you coming into this already with a problem of being a problem in a police car alone on a shift? And we want to know that up front and gauge that we're not appointing all 5 people who all need this accommodation, and none of our potential appointees will ever have that experience. Personally, it's like way too late, but personally, it was a total eye-opener with me. I'm with a 24-year-old Hispanic kid from Oxnard, and unbeknownst to me, where the real beats are in town, you know, the Mesa beat is also San Andreas going up and down the west side. And, you know, he jokingly said, if you're expecting us to go over to the Mesa much tonight, no thank you. We don't really have the same problems going over the hill that we do. We will be up and down San Andreas and in and out of the alleys 100 times tonight. Eye-opener on what that means, eye-opener how that works, eye-opener on how people are actually living in some of our stops over there, and the type of things that intrude upon their daily lives that never intrude upon mine, so totally valuable for a person like me. And if I was uncomfortable, I think I should be uncomfortable. I mean, I think that's part of the hope of that, is to expose everybody to what they're not exposed to already. I continue to, I don't know how you can make it better, but I continue to be uncomfortable with the process and structure of the whole serious finding and misconduct thing. And I think, Mr. Doimus, you can expect really, really detail-oriented questions on what questions somebody like me can ask at the interview process to ferret that out, where we're missing it because it was prior to legislation, where it falls into a gray area. And, you know, that I think that is one of the blessings or burdens that comes to this seat. So, and then I'd like to hear more next week, I guess, on background checks, because I'm not really sure what a background check, in my perspective, my frame of reference, I'm not really sure what a background check could show or doesn't show or does show. And I would presume that the concern there is that somebody at some point in time, or even recently in time, had just had run-ins with law enforcement, and they're showing up as entries on a background check, and they're, rather than a negative thing to be viewed, they're actually the opposite. They're indicative of exactly what the problem is, that people of color are stopped more often, people of color are found to have items that would go on a background check more often. And so don't really have a good finger on why we need them and what's on them and what the consequences is of knowing what's on them, compared to making a decision that would exclude somebody who should be on the commission. And then I continue to not have a problem with any participation by a member of law enforcement, or how we're defining law enforcement. Perhaps one way to temper that worry a little bit is to assign a billet to it, like we do with other boards and commissions, and say no more than one of the members may fit into that category. In my admittedly white perspective, excluding them because there's a potential bad bias that may be there also removes the opportunity for a good bias or knowledge or frame of reference that they could bring. And again, I think that's why you sit 7 people up here to ferret that out and make that decision. I think for a few cycles, there's going to be a ton of. I think the current board and commission thing would be, as I affectionately call it, a dog and pony show, and 2 minutes at the thing and tell us your life, and we've all known each other or something. I suspect there's going to be a rather engaged and extensive question and answer period for these appointments, and I think there should be, and I think that's the part of the burden falls on us to try and make sure we're getting the best pool we can, and to address some of these things through our actions, not necessarily through writing them down on a piece of paper and excluding a whole set of people. So that's kind of my general requirements. I'll listen to the rest and see where we go.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. Councilmember Gutierrez, do you have comments now?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pretty much good with all of the staff recommendations, except for I'd like to adopt the recommendation from Mr. Escobedo about having the law enforcement officers not serve in Santa Barbara County. When it comes to the ride-along, I'm a little, right now, I'm just on the fence, just because I found it to be really eye-opening to do it. I don't know about it. Mike, when you went on the ride-along, were you in the back or the front seat? Does it matter? Because I keep hearing, oh, they don't want to be in the back seat. So, to me, I didn't feel that uncomfortable. But obviously, I have a level of, I have a status level in the community that gives me a false sense of confidence, I guess you can say, safety. So I am on the fence because I did find it extremely educational and eye-opening, especially going on New Year's Eve, and I got to see this condensed version of what they see on almost any given night in one night, where the majority of the calls we showed up to were welfare checks, where they had to check on somebody who was feeling suicidal or non-responsive. And to know that that's what they had to deal with the majority of the time was just shocking to me, because each call that we went to, and it was literally minute by minute, we were being called to show up to something else. Obviously, it was New Year's Eve, so there was a lot going on. But each one of those calls was, just for me as an observer, was traumatic. And then knowing that they have to do that day in, day out for years, it was a lot to try to contemplate that. So I did find it educational, the whole ride-along experience. But I also don't want to make these people who are going to volunteer on this board feel uncomfortable or triggered or cause any other trauma to them.
Councilmember Gutierrez, I'm sorry, I know it's not customary to interrupt. We just want to clarify, no one would sit in the back seat on a ride-along ever. That's not allowed. The
Right.
second piece, just for record, it is in the committee agenda report, but other immersive experiences do not include being in a police vehicle with another individual. It includes virtual simulation, walking through body cam footage, sitting with dispatch. So I just want to note that for the record, that we will make whatever accommodations necessary for the comfort of that commissioner.
Or walk-alongs as opposed to
Exactly.
drive-alongs.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm willing to also make that voluntary, the ride-along. And other than those 2 points, I'm okay with what the staff recommendation states. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I will make my comments. Just first, this is historically significant, and I really want to emphasize that this didn't come about because there was an incident within our city that made the rally cry for this type of oversight, and that is significant. And the idea of the oversight is that it's in place and hopefully never needed for some large event, because it sets up transparency and in my mind supports our police department and police officers. I just want to say, to the credit of the city administrator's office, the police department, past chiefs, interim chiefs, current chief, have all been supportive and welcoming of progressive policing and as some form of oversight as being part of that model. So very much to the credit that has been supported throughout this entire process. There have been differences on how to see it through and different line items on that, but overwhelmingly there has been support for this process. There's been broad input. We had Ms. Wood describing, over 1,000 members of the public and focus groups, and those focus groups included law enforcement officers, and there may have been input in those sessions that might not have been as comfortable to share out in larger sessions. I have to have confidence that that commission, the formation commission that we put together with very broad backgrounds and not limited, and because it was 14 people, I think it was appropriate that there be all spectrum of input to that. I do have concerns once you make that a small committee of 5, it becomes so much more important what those individual perspectives are in that context. So I also really want to emphasize that we do enjoy phenomenal public servants in our community, and there is really, again, overwhelmingly a feeling of support for our law enforcement. I think this process will shine light on that. The transparency will just make it all that much more clear to the public how few complaints there are, how minimal the issues are, and hopefully if there are issues, then give guidance to how they might be addressed early and not ever get to the point where we have large incidences, which I don't anticipate us having. It's very important to me to support the true independence of this body. From the original CFC recommendations, the original recommendation was that there be an independent police monitor. We didn't really go with that recommendation. So in lieu of that, I think it's really important that the body itself be truly independent. And even if it is just the perception or the optics, I don't want this Fire and Police Commission to be undermined by public perception that there is anyone on there that is skewing it one way or the other. And bias, as Councilmember Jordan pointed out, it could be in either direction. It's just experience that colors the way that you see what's before you. And to me, it could be very beneficial, the perspective of former police officer. It could be detrimental. It could go on either way of that, just because it is very difficult to separate out that own lived experience. I really want to protect the integrity of the independence of this body, and it is with the intention of protecting the special relationship, as was mentioned, between law enforcement and the community, and just not leaving room for that type of accusation that it was because of a certain bias that a decision went one way or another. Also on that line of having former police officers who served in Santa Barbara County as either police or sheriffs, I think there are so many loopholes that were pointed out and nuances, and is it within this jurisdiction or this period of time, or is it 15 years ago past where we don't even have access to those records anymore? I think if we just not have that as an opening, then we don't need to go into all those records of an individual or all those questions. It can just be that on either end of the experience spectrum from oversight, that just not be part of a 5-person group. That would be my preference. So we do have, and it was sent to us, and we have it here on the dais, this red line of what was put forward in the ordinance agenda report, and then I did ask members of the Formation Commission to take a look at it once it had already gone through all the processes and then come back to us here. And it includes red line recommendations. To my reading of them, they're very minimal. We can go through them one by one, and I can say why I support each one. Some of them are just so small. I would be prepared to move them in their entirety if there was comfort with that, but I'm guessing there might not be, or I can go through them. There's not that many. I could go through each one and say why I support each one, and we could try to decide that today. But I feel that they are in line with the ordinance as presented and in the spirit of the ordinance as presented. And the ordinance as presented already made the shift of the work of oversight within the Fire and Police Commission. There already have been big adjustments on all sides, and I think this ordinance is really getting us there, and with these very small changes, I think it's there, and if these small changes were accepted, I would be comfortable moving it forward. I don't know if we need to go through the individual changes, or if you want to discuss that in our 15 minutes left. Councilmember Gutierrez.
If you make a motion, I'll second.
Okay, I would like to move the ordinance as presented to the ordinance committee in the ordinance agenda report with accepting the red line changes sent to us, and it's in public comment. I don't know if you need the paper copy to accept it or not, Mr. Toymas? Or how do I reference this document?
I would reference the document on the, how you received it, so we can know exactly.
Received through email correspondence from Gabe Escobedo to accept the red line changes, and with those changes, move the ordinance forward to council. That's the motion.
I second that.
Okay. Discussion to the motion?
So I have a couple items on there that just are clearly against what I thought were okay, so I'll just
Okay.
say no, just to be the
Do-
fly in the ointment to move the discussion along to council.
Do you want to say no, or do you want to discuss the individuals?
No, I think.
Just no.
Clearly, the one about law enforcement is against the preference I had, and I mean, if, literally, if we get up to council and a majority of council thinks the red line is better than here, I'm not going to have a problem going along with that, but I think I'll stay on the opposite side right now, just to make sure that we have that real discussion at council.
Okay, thank you. And so we're ready for a roll call vote. Before we vote, I do want to sincerely thank all the efforts that have been made throughout the community, all the engagement, the community, the Formation Commission, members of the public, members of the city administrator's office, law enforcement, for really working collaboratively to come up with this ordinance. Yeah, so we're ready for a vote.
So ordinance committee recommends, recommendations moved by Chair Snedden as presented to the ordinance committee in the agenda report, accepting the red line changes sent by Gabe Escobedo via email from the Community Formation Commission, seconded by Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Could I just interrupt you, Nicole, to ask a question? So that document was not submitted publicly. That was an internal email to...
Went to the city clerk.
Right?
It went to the city clerk as well.
Chair Snedden and Councilmember Jordan, we sent it to the city clerk. It was not directed to the
Okay,
city
and
clerk.
does that make it okay?
It's now officially a public document in the record, when it was submitted to the city clerk.
So my question goes to nobody out in the public, other than those who sent the document and those received the document, have any idea what's in that document?
Chair Snedden and Councilmember Jordan, you're probably, that's an estimation on my part, but probably, especially considering the timing of when it was received. It was received Sunday night, and so here we are Tuesday, starting at 11, so I don't think so. That was part of our community outreach, so that was after the deadline for it. So I don't know how many people of the public saw it, so it is considered public comment. Council can look, the ordinance committee can look at it and say, we like these changes, and instruct us to adopt them.
So it will
That's
get
not
its
an issue.
venue going to council, that's what you're saying?
Correct.
And that's okay?
That's okay.
Okay, thanks, sorry.
That's okay.
And I would add it's similar to when we receive red line documents, and if we feel we need more time, then we could hold it. But, okay. We're ready for a
So we're
vote then?
moving- moving
Okay.
forward. Councilmember Jordan.
No.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Aye.
Chair Snedden.
Yes.
Thank you. Passes.
Thank you. So we're adjourned.